Welcome to Marci Talks Money and Life with your host, Money Marci.
Hello, I am Money Marci. Welcome. Today's guest is Albert Bramante. Dr. Albert Bramante is a talent agent, performance psychologist, and mindset expert who has spent over 20 years helping high performers, both in the entertainment industry and beyond, conquer their mental roadblocks. With a PhD in psychology and certifications in hypnosis and NLP, he bridges the gap between talent, business success, and the psychology of peak performance. Welcome, Albert.
Thank you so much for having me, Marci. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you. Psychology, talent agent, hypnotherapist. What made you go in all of these directions?
Well, it was kind of by accident. I never really intended to go into the entertainment industry, and at least when I was a child. My goal was to be a clinical psychologist. My goal was to be a college professor. I grew up, my mom was a teacher, my father was a football coach, and I think between the teaching and the coaching that was in my family, it kind of just led me down this path of being an educator. I've always saw myself in front of a classroom. That was like my dream, all throughout high school and college was to be in front of the classroom. I also had a very insatiable curiosity about people, about human beings, the human condition. Even growing up, I was always kind of chastised as I'm too nosy or I'm too intense, which I think is kind of my superpowers now. So I was just always interested in like the human condition. So I wasn't the unpopular kid, but I wasn't exactly the popular one either. So because I'm the youngest of my family and my sibling that's nearest to my age is like 8 years older than me. So I grew up kind of like as the only child in certain aspects. So I was more the kid that hung out with the adults. I was more of the kid that had more of the adult like conversation. When I was in high school, I was reading books like How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie and David Burns' Feeling Good, which is like a classic primer on cognitive behavioral therapy. Those were my books reading in high school. Not typically what you would see as a freshman and sophomore in high school reading. That wasn't your typical reading material, but that was mine. And I spent a lot of time in the library on the weekends. That was like my fun spot, my sanctuary. And I read a lot of books. I read a lot of books about the brain, psychotherapy, psychology. And this is really was an immense interest in me. I couldn't get enough of it. My junior year in high school, I kind of like declared psychology was gonna be my age. But I also had an interest in the arts too. So I was like in the drama club in high school. In college, I took some acting classes as electives and theater classes, and I enjoyed it. I mean, I didn't at that time. I didn't see myself doing much with it. It was more of like this is an interest of mine, a hobby. So flash forward, I'm about to finish my master's degree. I wound up at an internship at a talk show in New York, the Sally Jesse Raphael show. It's a throwback from the '90s and early 2000s. She was the one with the thick red glasses. That was like her calling card. But I found myself in a very interesting position, in an internship. It wasn't production. It was more of behind the scenes work, doing follow up care, aftercare. And so I was working with the aftercare consultant on the show, who was a therapist and the show's like in-house expert. So I reached out to her on a whim when I was in grad school to one of the summers of watching this Just Raphael show. I just kind of read that. So I'm a big fan. I'd love to work with you. I'm going for a master's in psychology. If there's any way we can collaborate. And I hit send. And I didn't think anything was going to happen of that. She probably gets thousands of these messages. So I went about my own way. I forgot about the fact that I sent that email out. 2 months later, I'm on my way to class. And I said, I'm just going to check my email this time. I log into my email and I see response to your website message. What's this? Okay, open it up. There was a person in the show saying, asked me where I was located because she was looking for an intern for the spring. So I responded. A week or two later, we're on the phone. I was surreal because I watch this therapist on TV all the time. Now I'm talking to her on the phone. And I landed the internship. And so the last semester of grad school, I was, working once, twice a week in New York at the Sally Jesse Raphael show. And it was a very eye-opening experience. It was my first like professional show business opportunity because it was nothing what I expected.
I imagine that was much more the business side of things than the entertainment side of things, even though it was on TV.
Yeah, it was on TV, but like I said, my expectation of what a talk show I thought a talk show was a lot different than the reality. I'll say that of what a talk show is. And now of course, when many years later, and I talked to people who worked in almost every talk show, and they said it's the exact same thing. Has nothing to do with helping people. It's all about ratings. And the stories were real. I could say at least where I was at. The stories were somewhat real. The context was a bit staged. So, for example, the host has a teleprompter. She had an earpiece. Every line every comment, everywhere to stand was kind of directed. It was like a stage direction. Stand over here. The audience was then like prompted, okay, you need to laugh, you need to sigh, you need to moan, you need to boo. And they have cue cards up like boo here, applaud here, and everything was scripted. And a lot of the guests that were coming on were like so upset afterward they felt like they were misled.
Well, but I would expect that of anyone on TV because
Well, yeah, I mean, my 22-year-old self, 23-year-old self really wasn't versed in that area. Now, many years later, we're getting the business side. It makes perfect 100% sense. It's acting on some level. It really is. And part of the release was that you have to kind of do what the producers tell you to do. Or we're going to negate the agreement. Now the agreement was that they paid like a stipend like for meals, and they paid for your transportation, hotel, and which is great. I mean, for New York, a free trip to New York with meals is I might would consider that. The truth of the matter is you had to do what they tell you. And a lot of guests would tell me like they would want it done as soon as the show was over. It's like, okay, let's get back to the airport as fast as possible. We're done. Yeah, it wasn't something I wanted to work in ever again. But it was a good experience because at least it opened up my eyes about the reality of the business. And now, instead of doing it, working this industry, the entertainment industry for 21 years, I can tell you that this is kind of like the norm
for
in
talk
every
shows.
for talk shows. That 100%. So fast forward after that, 9/11 had happened. This was the same year on 9/11. The person I was working with, Sally, had called me and said, "Hey, I need help on the ground." And we're doing a team together. A lot of them were actors, producers, directors, filmmakers, and we all started collaborating. We are going to do some documentaries. We were going to do some, and I'm like, and then the acting thing kind of came back in. So as most people who work as agents or casting directors, we all started off as actors, most of us. So I did a little bit of acting myself, did a couple of indie films, some commercials, nothing large, nothing that would say like, oh, you would see me here. So, but I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed being around actors. And even though I was studying psychology and clinical psychology, I found myself identifying more with entertainers and creatives than I did with stuffy academic types. That's what I would kind of say it as. Like I didn't belong in that environment. I went to academic conferences, the American EAPA conference and all that. I didn't fit in. I grew up in a blue collar family. I didn't really know how to fit in. But I fit in along with the actors. So, but I realized I didn't want to be an actor. It wasn't so much fulfilling for me to be performing, but I like being the environment. So I was like, okay, how do I balance, the being in the environment and making some sort of an income here? I said, okay, I'm going to represent. I'm going to coach, represent, support actors as much as possible. So 2004, I started my first company. At that time, I made the decision to go get my PhD. I was like, I've always wanted it. I was halfway there. Why don't I continue doing it? So I enrolled in and I received my PhD at Walden University, which is a distance learning university. And it was good for me at the time because I was teaching part time and I was also building up my company. I wouldn't have really had the time to commute back and forth to a land based university for classes. I wouldn't have had the time to do that and to do everything else. So it was really convenient to do an online university. When it came time to look at my dissertations, where everything kind of comes full circle, I decided that I was going to study actors. And particularly, one thing I noticed was actors are self sabotaging. We saw a high rise of imposter syndrome. And I'm like, well, now here's a little bit of a niche I can kind of put myself in because I can now look at, the psychology behind self-sabotage in performing artists. And so that was my dissertation, self-defeating behavior in performing artists. And it was amazing because I got to combine both my worlds, psychology with actors. So that's what I did my dissertation in. And through this time, I realized I really didn't want to be a clinical psychologist anymore. It wasn't resonating with me. The pathologizing, the talk, sometimes talk therapy, for 8, 10 years, and no really cure or insight, just didn't resonate with me anymore. And so I started looking into more solution focused. And that's where it kind of led me down the path of NLP and hypnosis. That's where I immersed myself into that
Let me
area.
interrupt you for a second, because what is NLP? I know it as natural language processing, which is AI and computer related term. And
Right. Well, that's one acronym of it. But NLP, and what I was just saying, is neuro linguistic programming. Now, a lot of people get that confused because it's the same acronym, NLP. But neuro linguistic programming is the same, metaphor to computer programming, but more about the mind. So you're using language, you're using communication, you're using mental processes to kind of reprogram your entire self.
so that goes back to the self-sabotage and the mindset
Yes,
and that kind of thing by the words you
mindset is
choose.
really great on mindset. And kind of like using language and using other types of imagery and all that to kind of rechange and rewire your mindset in a sense. The one thing we learned about the brain is that it can change. Back in the 80s and 90s, it used to be kind of like the knowledge that like when you hit like 30, you were kind of like done. There was no changing. You couldn't teach an old dog new tricks, which is not true at all at this point. In this day and age, because we discovered something called neuroplasticity, which is the brain and nervous system can rewire itself through make new connections, so you can learn new things, you can change it in the age. And that was really through groundbreaking work in, like I said, NLP and even other types of like quantum psychology, which is about, again, using the thoughts to change your physiology, to change your life and your world. So that became more of a passion of mine because I think it felt so well with, again, the self-sabotaging imposter syndrome. So that's where I'm like, so I'm a clinical psychologist by training, but not by practice.
Okay, well, I went on your website and I saw that you offer, you've got like hypnotherapy sections. I assume those are recordings and whatever else.
Yes.
So you don't see patients individually, but you do have these hypnotherapy resources available.
Yeah, and I also do sometimes informal coaching, like online and in groups. So yeah, I don't advertise myself as a therapist. I'm not. I'm not licensed, and I wouldn't ethically call myself a therapist because I'm not a licensed one. Although I have all the training, both clinical psychology and also solution-focused therapy.
Okay, and I see that you are actually a professor at a community college.
Mm-hmm.
So some of your dreams and your end space did fit together.
Absolutely. Well, I did both. I taught both full-time and part-time. Now in the past 9 years, I've been doing a part-time at a community college in New York, and I love what I do. I love teaching. I always did. I mean, it was kind of the best thing ever, for me. I always consider myself, like I said, an educator.
That's awesome. Your dissertation sounds like it's really close to your book, but not necessarily
Yes.
the same.
It's yes and no, because it was based on my book. Now, the dissertation was groundbreaking because at that time, self-sabotage was being looked at, but it was more on the corporate or more on the athletic side. But performing artists at that time, especially in 2015 when the dissertation was published, there was not a lot written about actors, at least in the scholarly space. So I kind of filled the need, and my advisors when I was in grad school, my dissertation committee, were really encouraged me to publish because, again, it was groundbreaking. Now, the thing about a dissertation is I'm very proud of the work I did, but it's very hard to share that with other people because of the technical language and the academic language. 'Cause a lot of my family and friends are trying to be supportive, and they're like, "Oh, can I read your dissertation?" I did get it bound into a book-like format, and I would show that to them, and they'd get through like the first few pages, and they're like, "That's nice," and they close it.
Right. Well,
And
it was written for academics.
yeah, and I don't blame them because I wouldn't probably wanted to read that myself if I wasn't an academic, because it's very, very, very technical. So I years later I said, you know what, I want to turn this into a book. But now the challenge was, okay, make this to a general audience, an audience that will be able to appreciate and understand.
You converted it
Yeah,
for
I,
everyday,
I, con-
every man.
converted to everyday reading. Of course, I added a lot new insights. I added some stories. I added some, you know, context. But I did, the one thing I did kind of still want to honor was that a lot of the stuff that I was mentioned in the book was backed up by research. It's backed up by facts, and I'm not just like coming up with a random thing. So I wanted to give respect because yes, I am an academic nerd. So I wanted to give my respect to research.
Were you including your dissertation and your citations for your book?
Yes. Yeah.
That's got to feel good to
Not as
cite
much.
yourself.
Not as much, because I used to think it was weird, but I was like, yeah, I gotta do it. But I was like, because I would see a lot, I'd read a lot of scholarly articles, and half the citations of a lot of these articles are like the author's own work. And I always thought, but I was like, you know what, I guess I could see from an ethical standpoint, you want to model that. But yeah, I did make some references in my dissertation, this and found that. Because for my dissertation, I did an actual study of that.
Right. Oh, so Albert's book is called Rise Above the Script, and it's about self-sabotage for performing artists, also for entrepreneurs, students, parents, because we all do self-sabotage. We all get in our own way. And,
Absolutely.
that's part of the reason that he's here on my show, because your self-sabotage is impacting your ability for education, for opportunities, for work-related, for money-related. So it's important to recognize how you're getting in your own way and how to get out of your way. But your description used the terms friction between their ambition and their achievement, and I love that. I mean, that's just so, I don't even know the word to use it, but I just love the way that flows, and I can see what that means, how your ambition is and your achievement, and they're not the same, and there's that internal fight between them.
Oh yeah, and I put a whole chapter in the book about money, and it's about your relationship with money, because almost everybody I would assume everyone listening here and everyone who has these conversations wants to make money on a conscious level. That's why we get up and do what we do, or at least part of the reason. But it then comes down to, what is your relationship with money all about? Because if you're looking at money as sometimes evil, because that's maybe the message we got morally growing up, was, the misconstrued message, misquoted message of money is the root of all evil. And that was never really a quote, a real quote. It was more of the love of money is the root of all evil, not money itself. And so a lot of times we may have heard these messages in religious teachings and from our parents, from society, that money is the root of all evil. So we're not evil. Therefore, let's not have money. Or money has become
Right.
almost a reactive substance. And that's why you see sometimes people who go, especially actors or athletes or people who win the lottery, they get into some major windfall where they get a lot of money so quickly. But then a year or two later, 3 years later, they're in more debt than they were before they started because they don't know how to handle it. It's like the subconsciously they need to get rid of it, because again, it's like a radioactive substance. So we need to improve our relationship with money.
That's what I'm here for, to help people improve their relationship with money. While we're continuing with that and the imposter syndrome and the self-sabotage, then we go also to fear of failure. I think fits in probably right in there. You're afraid to succeed and you're afraid to fail.
Yeah.
And
Well, because we like to stay comfortable, and both succeeding and failure is uncomfortable. Now, some people may be thinking, well, why would succeeding be uncomfortable? Well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, change, more pressure. Yeah, even identity. You may have to change your identity. You're now a whatever it is you were. Now you have to change to something else, and that's scary. Really fundamentally scary to change your identity. There's also relationships too. You may lose relationships because some people who are around you may find that your success may be a threat to them. And sometimes you may even hear from family members who would say, "Oh, well, look at him or look at her. You think she's better than us, or you think he's better than us." or you're too good for us now. And then we start hearing messages like that, which is then kind of like puts a guilt trip on us. And therefore, we're going to subconsciously make a vow that, well, therefore, I'm not that way. I'll make sure I stay mediocre and average. And that's what we subconsciously tell ourselves. And that leads us to self sabotage.
It's so hard when we get in each other's way, and the fact of the matter is we are all just trying to get by, whether you have money or
Yeah.
you don't have money, or you have money temporarily, or you're in a challenging situation temporarily. We are all just trying to get by. And
100%. Yes.
yeah, no, it's hard. That brings me to failing forwards, because what can you take out of your failures? What are the lessons?
What feedback can you get? Exactly. So failure is feedback. And a lot of people think that, oh, I made a mistake, I failed. No, you're actually one step closer to your goal now. Because now you know what doesn't work.
Right.
So now you know what you can do differently. And I use the analogy of babies. If you've been around toddlers and babies, when they learn to walk, now they will fall down even dozens to hundreds of times. What do? They get back up and try again. And eventually they walk. Yeah, I've never seen someone say, the walking thing's not for me. I quit. Or you never see parents that will point to the child and said, you're not equipped to walk. But we do this with everything else in our life. We make one or two mistakes and that's it. I'm done. I quit. But
It's
maybe we should all adapt the mindset of those infants.
it's funny how sometimes it seems so much easier to be supportive of someone else than to be supportive of yourself.
Of course. And I can tell this even from coaches, therapists, and anybody else. We're great at giving advice to other people. Excellent advice. And I've even found myself sometimes like listening to the advice I give other people. I'm like, yeah, I should be taking that myself. Now, why am I not doing that? That sounds great. Because I can easily coach somebody who's going through what I'm going through sometimes. And it's like, well, okay, then why am I not practicing what I preach right now?
Well, and that's where the coaching comes in, and having that support person, whether it's a professional or a friend, that when you're going to make a change in your life, you need a cheerleader.
Also, an accountability partner. You need someone who's going to hold you accountable. And, kind of keep you in check. And the one thing about a myth about hiring a coach is it's any level, even high. Even if you look at the most peak performers and elite CEOs, they may not publicly admit it, but they have coaches behind the scenes that are always guiding them and mentoring them. I know some really successful, influencers, content creators, coaches that have like 3 or 4 coaches of their own, that are, again, be accountable. The one thing about imposter syndrome is a lot of people may not even realize that even the high achievers often grapple with imposter syndrome. I can tell you a lot of my acting clients, when they're on set with like an A-list actor, are very shocked to see how subconscious these A-list actors can be. I think a lot of times when we take high achievers and put them on a pedestal, I'm like, no, they're human beings just like all of us.
I imagine it's got to be hard for actors, because you can be on a hit TV series of whatever kind, or in a couple of movies, and have major roles, and then you've got a while before you're really seen again. And you
Yeah.
have to wonder, was that a fluke? And how do you keep getting back up? And you need people in your corner for that. And that's just a very public a public viewing that we can all see. You don't see it necessarily with someone who works at a business and
Yeah.
gets laid off and all of that. I
Well,
see that a lot, where people are commenting on LinkedIn, hey, I got laid off, and then all my friends from work don't seem to exist anymore.
yeah. Well, that's true too, because one of the truths, and I've had this too, where it's like when I left companies and I was younger, everyone's like, "Oh, we're gonna keep in touch." That doesn't happen. Once you kind of leave a company, it's like if they're still there, it's just the way it is. So even with actors too, like let's say you work together for 3 months on a play, or even 6 months on a film, or a couple of years on a TV show. During that time, you become very close. You become very like you know you see each other sometimes on a daily basis, sometimes even more than you might even see your family or your significant others. So there's a real bond there. But unfortunately, when the show is over, the production ends. Sometimes you may lose contact. What makes this work, entertainment or creatives differently than others is again because if you get laid off, you can get really hired right back on again, especially if you have a very good track record. With actors, every time you leave a project, you're not going to start all over again to prove yourself an audition, an audition, an audition. Whereas, in a corporate world, if you leave one position, there's a greater chance. I mean, you still have an interview, but there's a greater chance that, you don't really have to prove yourself because you already have that resume and that track record.
True. True. And I think this brings us to communication and authentic communication and the authenticity paradox.
Yes. Well, as actors, the one thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is how vulnerable the acting process is, because you have to sometimes adapt yourself to heavy roles and intense roles. A lot of times, when you spend a lot of time embodying characters who has maybe dark, they have a torture type of character, it starts to seep into your daily life. And I've had a lot of actors tell me when they would like end the play that they needed, sometimes it took them a month or two to kind of recover mentally and emotionally from that. Because you start adapting, you start almost, becoming, not necessarily full on that character, but you start becoming that, at least a thought process, because you embody a character so long. Yeah, I've actually heard of, sometimes actors need to go to a therapist afterwards to decompress after playing an intense role because they're traumatized. They're experiencing trauma. So it's not just play, it's more than playing pretend. We saw this back in 2008. This is one of the reasons why they believe that Heath Ledger kind of went off the rails because, he just got off of playing The Dark Knight and did an amazing job aesthetically, creatively, but it tortured him. I mean, I also think a lot of people were saying he had a lot of demons even before he took that role. But it was just going to some dark places where you have to go when you play a role like that.
Yeah, I mean he won the Oscar for that performance of Joker, I think, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, everybody was raving about it. He did a great job,
But it wasn't worth his life.
Yeah, exactly. It was not worth it. And unfortunately, I think the actual final trigger that kind of, ended his life was that role. So, I think that's a lot of things about reality of actors. I've heard some actors sometimes stop acting because of a role that traumatized them.
I can understand that. I mean, some of those roles, well, first off, there's a whole lot of movies I can't see because I'm just not interested in that level of intensity. Yeah. For me, I go to be entertained. And if it's going to be that heavy and dark, I'm just not interested. But to have to go and personify that and be that for an extended period of time, that's got to be traumatizing. But I think we kind of diverged from authentic communication, which is more about having people feel you're real and that you are authentic as opposed to just playing a role and pretending.
Yeah, well, and that's the whole thing too. I mean, I think when it comes to authenticity, a lot of people sometimes forget with actors that they're real people as well, and that the characters that they play are different from who they are. And this is why, look, a lot of actors that I know are very introverted. Some people find that a little bit shocking, but even actors, musicians, a lot of them are introverted, heavily introverts. Because they may show larger than life personalities, but they're doing it because they're performing, not because of the audience. I've had a lot of actors who are on stage actors, even musicians, tell me sometimes they get so wrapped up, like in that flow state, that they don't even pay attention to the audience. They don't even know the audience is there because they're so wrapped up into doing what they're doing. But I think going back to the authenticity is, again, who are they? Who are you? And if you look at another tragedy, Robin Williams, I heard a lot of people say that Robin Williams didn't, I mean, yeah, he liked the fame, but he also felt like people were wanting to be around him because he was Robin Williams, the actor, not because of Robin Williams, the human being. And that happens with a lot of actors because when they go in public, people surround them, they fawn, they they throw themselves at them. And it's not because they want to be with them personally. It's because of, hey, I'm around the celebrity, so I'm going to fulfill my own narcissistic need by taking a picture with the celebrity. When maybe they just want to go out to dinner with their family for the night. Maybe they just want to go out to the store and be left alone.
Right, right. And again, even when they are not acting, they are still acting because they are, look, I am this actor out in public, so I have to whether it's at award shows or red carpets or whatever else, they are going out not as an individual. They are going out as the character of being an actor. So that dividing line between when they get to be their authentic self versus the public face of the actor versus when they're playing a role, that's a lot to juggle. The mental health issues there, I can see why there would be a lot.
Totally, absolutely. I think that's the biggest thing for mental health and actors, and that's why, going with authenticity. It's why a lot of actors have struggle a lot of times with imposter syndrome, or even with substance use. There's a good number of actors that are in recovery or that are struggling with alcohol and substance use, because again, a lot of times it's that there's a lot of pain there, and they don't really have the outlet to express that pain and to draw that pain out, and so that's why they go into that. The important thing, I think, really remembering is that these actors are people, they're human beings. They have the same emotions that we do, the same struggles that we do. I think for somehow we put them on a pedestal. They're normal people. They're just they're playing a role on TV or a film or on stage. That's all they're doing.
I guess that puts you in a unique place as an agent who's also a psychologist.
Yeah, I mean, I have to respect boundaries. One thing, like, I'm not going to, in the middle of a conversation, say to somebody, oh, you need to go see someone, unless I have a rapport enough. And then I can say, well, maybe you ever think that this is happening or that is happening? And then I can suggest that. But if it's somebody I'm just looking to get jobs for, I'm not going to point that out at this point, because it's like part of it is ethical. We got to respect boundaries, and that's
Well, that's true too. Yeah, I can see that, which is too bad, because you have this superpower of this knowledge and education, but you do want to respect.
I'm here. People need me, and that's why, like, I've been guesting on podcasts because I'm here. That's why I tell people to come here, and the right ones will come, if they truly are ready. Because part of, like, with coaching and with therapy, you have to be ready and receptive and coachable and in a space where you're able to make changes. A lot of people aren't there yet. And one thing that doesn't really work is when you force somebody into something, especially like, oh, maybe someone's thrown into therapy because of their parents or their spouse wants them to go, or their partner, or even sometimes court order. They have to go to counseling and they don't want to be there. And it's kind of a waste of time, because the one thing about is we can have the best systems for change and the best change work processes, but we cannot change free will.
Right. Someone has to want to change.
Right. Because a lot of people think when I hear that I'm trained in hypnosis and NLP, that I'm going to manipulate them or that I'm going to make them do things that they're not going to do. And the one thing I'm saying, like, no matter how gifted a person may be in this area, if you don't want to do it, it's not going to work. If you're morally opposed to something, we can't make you do anything you wouldn't normally do.
So I don't have to worry about a hypnotist in a show making me bark like a dog?
Not unless you volunteered to go up there.
Okay.
Because that's the whole thing. When you see a hypnosis show, you also have to understand that people are volunteering to go up there, which means that they're already open to that idea. And they know what's about to happen. They know when the hypnotist snaps their finger that they're going to do a certain thing. So really, technically, you can also make the argument that the person, the hypnotist, is really not doing hypnotizing. We are doing it to ourselves.
That's an interesting way to think about it.
So
we're allowing them to help us get to where we want to go.
Exactly. One thing I was trying to explain, I'm like, look, what you're seeing people do, you're seeing people perform on stage, and you notice that there's no stage fright with these people at this point. So imagine if we can make someone forget that they have stage fright. I wonder what we can do in the future. I wonder what we can do down the line. If we can make someone forget that they're performing, maybe we can forget that they have, anxiety, or that they have this fear. So a lot of things we can do with that.
That's a lot to think about. People, if you are interested in changing, you have to really make that choice to change, and then the opportunities are out there.
There's so many opportunities when you make that choice, that declaration.
Albert, before we wrap up, have you got anything you'd like to share that maybe we just didn't cover?
Well, I'm just going to say this, that all the answers or all the solutions that you need are really within you. It just takes sometimes a little bit of coaching to help you tap into those resources. So we can help you become your own coach, become your own, real agent of change because you have the resources within you. All of us do to be successful. We just sometimes just need the little bit of restructuring on how to get there.
Well, thank you. Albert, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it was my pleasure. To my listeners, I will be sharing a link to Albert's information in the show notes. Please check him out. He shares a lot of interesting information. And don't forget to subscribe, leave us a review, and stay tuned. I'll see you next time. This has been Money Marci on Marci Talks Money and Life. You got this. See ya.